Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. No, I am not just wearing the same shirt a week later. I am currently on vacation, so I'm recording this video in advance. I just got finished doing my 28 Years Later review, which if you haven't seen and you're watching this video, obviously you like zombies, so just check out my channel. I have that review up there, and I've also covered Project Zomboid before. But this week's video is about the cut content of Project Zomboid. Now, Project Zomboid is a game that's constantly being updated, and things are being added and removed. So, depending on when you watch this, if you watch this like, I don't know, a year removed, it might be much different. But as of right now, we're going to talk about some of the cut content. So first and foremost, one of the biggest things that people have requested to be added to Project Zomboid is NPCs. The world is notably very, very empty. There's no animals, there's no humans. Well, at least in the current build now, I think they've re-added animals in like the build 42 beta. But anyway, human NPCs are something that people want. And I think for me personally, as someone who's very familiar with the lore of this game, I would love to see them work within the lore that they've set out and see them acting accordingly. I think that would be fantastic. But what a lot of people don't know is that early on there were NPCs within the game. They were just removed. And with those NPCs came a lot of different moodles and interactions that are no longer in the game. And that's what we're going to start off with. First and foremost, we have the anger moodle. The anger moodle will pop up for an NPC if a team request is rejected by a player or if they have to reject you. It'll pop up on both sides if it's two NPCs talking to each other. This moodle can progress over time. There's different levels, and the highest level may even lead to open hostility and combat with each other. The different levels are irritated, annoyed, angry, and then finally furious, which then leads to combat. The different levels include irritated, annoyed, angry, and then finally furious. Once you get to the furious level, that's when combat will begin. Next, we have a trait that would be for both survivors and players, called brooding. What brooding does, it slows the rate at which the player or NPC recovers from negative moodles. So, for example, if you are angry, irritated, or whatever, like I previously said, if you also have the brooding trait, you will recover from that at a slower rate, leading to more negative interactions and a higher likelihood of violence. Next, we're going to get into a trait that I thought was pretty interesting that has been cut from the game, and that would be Hardened Drinker, which all it does is make it so that you don't get drunk as easily. Simple as that. I think it's a very interesting one. It would cost 3 points and would mean that you only get drunk at 30% the rate that you normally would when drinking alcohol. I believe this was removed for it being somewhat broken, because if your character was unhappy, you could simply spam a bunch of alcohol to bring up their happiness, while also not having nearly the same amount of drawbacks that you normally would with it. At one point in time, there was an area called the Downtown District. It would have been located southeast of the suburbs, and it was in the version of the game when it was called Knox County rather than what it's currently called. There are various locations within the downtown that were removed from the game, such as a small gas station. There was also an office building that was 2 stories. It also would have been directly connected to a coffee shop that was also removed. There was a second office building that was a little bit larger than the previous one. There were also various small shops and offices that were removed, sort of a little shopping center, I guess you could say, an outlets type area. There would have been another school located in this area as well. And finally, one of the more interesting areas removed from this location would have been a football field, which I think is very interesting because it would take up a lot of space. There was also a football throwable that was also removed when this was cut. And I just think that's very interesting because we don't really see a lot of sporting areas or things like that. And I think the introduction of more in-depth sporting equipment to use as weapons and armor would be really, really interesting. Although a football field would take up a ton of empty space. But I think it would have been interesting, especially if it's a larger one, a more commercialized one where you have an interior, you have different shops and food-related stuff inside, similar to what you think of with a traditional NFL stadium. I think that would have been a really cool location that you could turn into a base. And finally, the most interesting cut content is a story mode. Till Death Do Us Part was included in Project Zomboid as essentially a story mode. It was also a tutorial. It introduced players to basic concepts such as dealing with other survivors, fortification, scavenging for food. You'd also have to fend off zombies as well as hostile survivors. The initial plan was to have more of these individual stories as a separate mode from Sandbox. Basically, it would have been different stories from the fall of this area and the rise of the undead. It would have been very, very interesting. We'd get to see many different perspectives on the outbreak. However, this was removed in 2013 alongside the NPCs from the game. The reasoning was that NPCs were just simply too buggy, so they wanted to remove them and work on them. They felt that the level that the NPCs were at was more of a detriment to the experience rather than something that added something to the game. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about the specific characters within Till Death Do Us Part. It follows Bob and Kate, two survivors. Bob is a white, middle-aged man who, through everything, is devoted to taking care of his wife through this apocalypse. He doesn't seem to have any special skills right off the bat. There's nothing that he's like a specialist at. He's a fairly blank slate, which makes sense when you consider that this is kind of the introduction mission, the introduction story to these little vignettes. Kate Smith is Bob's wife. Throughout the story, Kate is stuck in bed. Her leg was broken due to an encounter with looters, and over the course of the story, you have to take care of her. Her leg will heal over time, but she'll never get back up again. I think it's because it wasn't really developed that far. But you can see that it progresses. It goes through the different stages of it bleeding to sort of healing over time, and you can also aid this process using certain medical supplies as well as a belt to slow the bleeding. This is where things get really, really interesting with the character Bobby Collins. Bobby is a very well-prepared survivor. He has nowhere to live currently, and when he hears the sounds of a radio coming from Bob's house, he decides to investigate. He is meant to sort of show the player the different types of interactions that you can have with survivors. If Bobby comes over and you are home, he will threaten you with a shotgun and force you to reveal Kate's location. If for whatever reason you are not home, like you're out scavenging, he will come into the house and investigate all of the rooms until he finds Kate. Either way, once he gets to Kate, he will have a discussion with her and attempt to kill her because he believes that she has been bit. When it comes to fighting him off, really the best way to do it is to try to get the drop on him. If you come back and he's talking to Kate, sneak up behind him and attack him, especially considering he has the advantage when it comes to the weapon. Bobby has a shotgun, while Bob, our character, simply has a hammer. Either way, once you take him out, you can loot his body for his possessions, which includes a shotgun, a baseball bat, some shells, a vest, and a lighter. There's a specific zombie labeled as the kitchen zombie. When you first go out to loot, you can find him in a kitchen that has a ton of food. His only real purpose is to startle the player in order to show the panic moodle and explain what that does. He's also meant to be the introduction to combat, so he doesn't do any damage to the player, even though he may stagger them. Once you complete the tutorial, you're kind of free to explore the area. There's no more new interactions with Kate. You can still kind of take care of her and protect her, but really the story aspect is done once you deal with Bobby. However, like I said, you're free to explore the map and play it as if it's a traditional game of Project Zomboid. If you go to the supermarket, you can encounter a scripted survivor there who threatens you with a gun. He tells you to leave. He also has a shotgun. He will kill the player if you don't leave, but if you're able to kill him, you are free to loot his valuables and the supermarket. Despite Kate and Bob being removed, the developers have reassured us that at some point in time, they will return. Now, whether this means that the stories mode will return as a whole, or if they will be survivors that you can encounter while playing in your sandbox mode, that's really unknown. However, in a YouTube video titled 2022 and Beyond, which is sort of an update video about the game, it shows the progress of the survivors' AI and also reintroduces Bob and Kate with updated models and kind of goes through their story once again. it's definitely worth a watch. But that is it for the Project Zomboid cut content video. There are tons of cut moodles and little items and things like that. And if you want me to do a deeper look at it, I absolutely will. This video is sort of just what I thought was interesting from the cut content that I could find. But if you want me to go deeper into it and look at individual items and, you know, the sort of little minuscule things like the changes in textures, things like that, please let me know in the comments below. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or, you know, whatever.